Hi guys, it's me, Mehdi.
Hey guys, it's Fran.
And this is Total Tactics Football. So, Fran, what are we discussing today?
On podcast two, we just had a review of the England versus Belgium game, probably the most highly contested match that we've seen so far, given that France Portugal was quite a dud. I'm not saying that the England Belgium game was fantastic, but I think at least we managed to see goals and also changes, from the first to second half where England started to perform a little bit better and eventually sealing that kind of win, which was quite important for their Nations League run.
Oh, no, that's absolutely true. I mean, we were discussing this, and I feel like it's been a hot topic for everybody. Southgate seems to keep, persisting with a very defensive setup, and we're considering this generation of talent that is coming out of England at the moment, which is like and it's very heavy on in defense, like actually fullbacks and forwards. He's like we saw three right backs play in one game. It was a meme everywhere that you can talk about it. But Brand, what do you think about this setup with the three at the back? Do you feel like maybe England can go in a sort of different direction? Do we think they will go in a different direction? And we've got the big talking point of Mount and Grealish.
No, I agree with that. I think England have tried for the back setups. We saw, for example, the game versus Netherlands previously where they lost 3-1. I think the four at the back structure just doesn't really work for England because they don't have this kind of centre back pairing that they think works out well. And I think at the three at the back, you get to mask the issues of the defensive lines. You also get the coverage from Rice and Henderson. And I think that's why Southgate insists on kind of playing with at least one holding player in that sense, covering a back three. Here we of course saw Rice and Henderson play, with Henderson still playing more of that deep lying role. And today, I mean, I think the interesting thing we saw was Trippier being moved to left wing back, which I will commend that he actually had a fantastic performance, especially in the second half,
Hmm.
both on the defensive and offensive end. But I think Trent struggled in this kind of formation, and we have yet to see whether that works out. In regards to the third right back, we had Kyle Walker, and I think he performed very admirably at centre back. And I would like to see England stay within the structure because I could see it working out very well. The question is, of course, with so few offensive personnel up top, what is the correct selection, given the fact that you have Grealish, Sancho, and maybe Sterling as well in the future at your disposal?
No, I mean, like you're right. Like we've got now Dominic Calvert-Lewin who's having a great season. Harry Kane, undroppable. You have Rashford, as you mentioned. Don't forget Madison, a player who had an incredible season last year, and who has the creative ability to unlock defenses. And even if Dali Ali isn't having the best of seasons, he's still a veteran in a sense for the English side. And I feel with the setup, you have such few spots, like you mentioned, and to choose players in those positions, you're going to have to drop a certain players. We saw that he picked Mount in the game against Belgium, which is a bit more of a important game considering the one against Wales where he chose Jack Grealish. I feel what Mount brings to the side is that he played a good amount of games last season. Started 32 times for Chelsea in the league. He had 7 goals, 5 assists. He reached his XG. But what also he does is what makes him so special is the fact that he defends from the front. We saw him make 10 tackles last season, 6 already. And what was interesting is actually that was this season. For last season, he made 31 successful tackles out of 48, and 34 of them were in the opponent's half. That shows you why Lampard is so convinced, and that even he still picks Mount. I feel like this in a team that if you have very few chances and you don't have players necessarily to hold the ball, you want to win up front with players who are going to press, with the tenacity and the speed. And Mount gives you that. Mount gives you this sort of drive. He's very good when as soon as he gets the ball, he's very good at recycling and shifting out of defense or in an attacking position, turning it into a dangerous one. And that is, what's crazy is that England have so many players in this position. What does Southgate really have to choose? And Jack Grealish, a player who's also had a great season last year, but possibly will have an even better one this season. Mount has a lot of competition. Mount clearly seems to have, the trust of Lampard and sort of even Southgate. And I feel like Southgate wants to release this pressure off his players, where they doesn't have to choose or make them feel like, okay, it's either going to be one or the other. I think he wants to use them both. But when it comes to those most crucial games, do you think it would be more wise to keep Mount in, or, you know, well, we've seen Jack Grealish how he's been doing. Do you reckon he could do better for the English side?
No, I mean, ultimately, there is a bit of a contradiction in the sense that a lot of fans expect results from England, and ultimately, I think England have seen their best kind of run of form playing in this three-back structure with more defensive players, as we mentioned. And obviously, I think Mount provides a lot on the defensive end, but I think so does Grealish. He very much played, if you watch Aston Villa's last season, he very much started from deep positions and was able to ball carry very effectively on that left wing position. But he's also able to do that on the right hand side of the pitch. And ultimately, whenever England want to move into a structure, let's say where they have one defensive mid in Henderson, for example, and play with a kind of front four behind Kane, I think Grealish could work out very well because he can slot into any of those positions. And the same can be said, of course, for I think Sancho and Mount as well. The difference for me, I think, is in Grealish and Sancho, you at least have players who would be able to create more effectively. Because what England struggled with in this match, other than the fact that Mount actually did score, ironically, off a deflected goal, of course, but it's the fact that they lack the ability to kind of find these through balls in the space, in the triangles that they have, given the fact that they have so many defensive players on their end of the pitch. They lack that killer pass, and I think that is what Grealish brings. You look at the last season, he was one of the leaders in terms of shot creation. Shot creation is one of those statistics where I think it shows the true kind of creativity of a player, shot creativity per 90, that is. And I think both Madison and Grealish ranked much higher than Mount in this sense. So ultimately, I think versus the top teams in the world, that's exactly what you need. You saw Kevin De Bruyne send in a killer pass for Carrasco in the same match that could have actually equalized the game for Belgium. But because of the fact that they're missing Hazard and Mertens, that chance wasn't finished, and Carrasco kind of scuffed it. But for me, I think when you play, let's say, a fully elite Belgium, where they have the kind of wingers who can be as deadly as the striker and Lukaku, then that's where you will need to contend with those teams. And I think Grealish becomes an even more important question for Southgate to ponder, because I just can't see England creating the same sort of chances versus a well-oiled defense such as France and Portugal if they insist to play Mount, for example, as
No,
good as
you're
he is.
No, you're absolutely right, and I feel like that's where you limit yourself, right? I mean, and we talked about their defensive issues. He's still, like, Southgate still picks Pickford, who, I mean, in by the end of this season should be, dethroned by Pope or Dean Henderson, who lead less chances, like, less errors to goal. Players who've been consistently performing don't look too dodgy in the back. Pickford, he's had great runs with England. I do feel like when the ball comes to him, he looks a little frantic, and that's never a good sign for your center backs, because they can make you nervous as well. And we talked about, yes, the need for masking that defense. But if you masking that defense, you need your offense to be that's creative as well. And as you mentioned, and I feel like maybe adding that Grealish into that option really sort of allows England to maybe, uh, release their players. But here's the question as well: considering, Kane is fully fit and available, and if you've got Sterling fully fit available, the possibility of Sancho, your Rashford, and there are basically three spots in the front that are going to be available. Do you even see Mount and maybe Grealish even getting the chances when it comes to big crunch matches?
No, that's a good point. I think Sancho is worth mentioning. He was obviously disciplined in a sense for that kind of party. But I think it really depends on how the performances over the rest of the season pan out. When you're looking at Europe, you've got a whole season to be played. I think Grealish is
Yeah.
in pole position to kind of establish himself as one of the leading players in the Premier League, given his kind of dark horse status in the previous season. And now that we've seen Aston Villa already post fantastic results, both on the defensive end, might I add, we can probably see Grealish kind of really stamp his name internationally, I think, and that will put a lot of pressure on Southgate. At the same end, Sancho hasn't featured much for Dortmund lately. Gio Reyna has been fantastic in the kind of role that he usually plays, and it's up for him as well to make sure that he can kind of stake a starting place. Man City as well, and both Man United have not been performing well, by contrast. And I think Rashford seems like he still holds a starting role within the formation, and it's understandable because he is that sort of lethal wing threat running down the line, very much in the same way that Sterling can perform. There is, for me, an alternative where maybe, as I say, if you look at the formation that they played in the World Cup, they played with maybe one deep line playmakers such as Henderson, as opposed to playing
Yeah.
a double pivot of Rice and Henderson. Perhaps that might be the option to allow for playing maybe four attacking players as opposed to three. But ultimately, I think you have to see how the rest of the season pans out. And, the same can be said for Belgium, on the other hand.
No, absolutely. And I think like with Belgium, they're gonna stick with this three at the back. For them, I think Roberto Martinez has found that balance for him for this team. The lack of a left back, a proper left back or left wing back, is one of the reasons why I think he moved to this formation. And we've seen him use Torgan Hazard, Carrasco, so like in the last game, possibly sometime Munier, Castagne to fill out those roles. And I think we mentioned before, when you've got the world class players in a squad, we've got Hazard who should be coming back. Hopefully, he's been suffering an injury due to again a compatriot of his, Munier. Or something Real Madrid fans are not going to be super happy about, and but I mean, and we've got Telemans who's grown up and he's a lot more matured, and I feel like he's consistently performing now as well at a higher quality level. I think Belgium, with when you've got the likes of Mertens and Hazard back available to the team, I think that just the level of quality that those players, individual players, have, I feel Roberto Martinez will not be too worried with this result as well. And Denier who had a good season last year around with Leon. I feel like filling in the left hand side where Vertonghen used to normally play gives you a little bit of mobility compared to the old Belgian. And I think now, considering them going forward, they've got some options to look at. Castagne, for me, is a wonderful player. I think he's had a great start for Leicester as well, and last season for Atalanta, I think he should in theory, be taking over Munir's spot on the right hand side and make it his own. Where Carrasco and Torgan dropping into that left wing back position, sort of more of a free hybrid position where they're allowed to move as a left wing, sort of move in interplay with the midfielders, as you mentioned, players like Tillemans and Witzel, sometimes De Bruyne releasing those balls through, and Hazard from their left forward position coming in a bit more. And I feel with that sort of unpredictability, it makes it difficult for the opposition to defend. And we saw them had a great run with this formation of this team and the World Cup, losing to the eventual champions. And I think Roberto Martinez, as it seems, has the same formation pretty much as Gareth Southgate. They are set with their formations, their style. I don't think we're going to see changes here. Personnel changes, yes, those are the few things. Sometimes I feel like when he's looking for uh, a bit more dominance, he'll drop De Bruyne into the midfield with Witzel, and that allows you to overflow with a lot of creative players and attacking players in that game. And I feel like something that maybe Southgate should be looking at, as they did in the last World Cup, where you had Henderson a deeper role, and you could maybe add that one extra body. I feel like bringing in a player like Grealish, who's going to, I personally think he's going to have a great season this year, not just because the way Aston Villa is playing, but because last year he had to, like as we mentioned, he had to do so much of the defensive work. And when you take that stress off someone, you've got other players around him who can bring the best out of you. I think we'll see what he's made of. And we've seen Aston Villa quote a ridiculous number of transfer value for him. I think it might have been a genius stroke for the club and the player themselves. If he performs well, he could possibly get a transfer to one of the top clubs, as we know. If he stays, we know he's going to be phenomenal, and he's a captain, is a leader on the pitch, and with the way he performs. I feel Aston Villa, he made the right decision staying there, not leaving this summer. COVID kind of helped with that because people didn't have necessarily the funds that they could spend, and I think this just gives him the chance. They gave him the players around him to sort of bring the best out of him, and I feel like he's going to be knocking on Southgate's door come the next summer, and I think that is the kind of headache a manager should have. You want to have so many quality players that even if you drop someone, you're going to get the criticism, but it doesn't matter because the players that you do choose are already quality enough.
No, I agree with that. I think in the modern climate of football too, you saw, for example, Arsene Wenger comment on this lately, how a lot of football nowadays is just these quick counter attacks based on presses. And, Grealish performs perfectly well in that role. So when we say that, for example, Ozil is a relic of the kind of more
Yeah,
traditional game, Grealish is absolutely not. He is able to participate in presses. He is physically, in perfect shape. He's able to run the game for 90 minutes at a time. I've watched him, plenty of times for Aston Villa, and he's capable of doing that and capable of receiving the ball and asking for it and trying to make these chances, from the start to the end of the game. And I think that's what separates some teams from others. De Bruyne, for example, even with a very diminished, I think, Belgium side, offensively at least, was still able to create so much because of that, because he demands the ball, because he wants to create. And ultimately, I think systems still fall prey to individual talent. I think many teams right now do operate in very similar systems, and so therefore, you need to put your best foot forward by playing the best players who can actually make a difference in these kind of crucial moments. And so for me, when I look at Belgium, I think absolutely you have to put De Bruyne in the midfield. I wonder if Witzel and Tillemans need to be kind of shifted, or at least one of them has to be dropped so that De Bruyne can play a little bit deeper, and therefore you allow Hazard and Mertens up top, and you get to still keep Carrasco, as you mentioned. So I think in this modern climate, it's about trying to have a balanced squad that still can physically play in this very demanding kind of pressing game, but still having these players who can make the difference. And for me, in De Bruyne and Grealish, you have these players, and I mean they're showing it week in week out in the Premier League, and it'll be interesting to see how both teams do next season going into the Euros.
oh, and I think it's going to be they've got also a lot of competition to face. We've got teams like Portugal, France, Netherlands, maybe with a few bad results, but we know that the squad has done well before under Koeman. It's going to be an interesting summer, something that we would have had this year, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, as we all know, we missed a chance. But some of these players are going to be happy because now, likes of Grealish, Mount, maybe some of the younger players have a possibility to go and perform next summer in the Euros. And I think that's gives it the coaches as well a bit more time to tweak and to test out and see if they can plug some of the holes and maybe add a little bit of shine to their squads.